Welcome to the Lobster War, a conflict from 1961 to 1963 where biology defined sovereignty. This conflict, centered on a crustaceans movement, almost brought two allied nations, Brazil and France, to naval warfare over national sovereignty and the law of the sea near the Brazilian northeast coast. The central dispute was summarized as the 10 million pound question: do they swim or do they crawl? Brazil argued if they crawl, they are attached to the continental shelf and belong to the coastal state. France argued that if they swim, they are fish-free for international capture in the water column. The green gold rush of the 1960s saw lobster fishing transform into a high-value economic engine for northeast Brazil, specifically in the warm, shallow waters off Ceará and Pernambuco. French fleets, recognizing the commercial potential, shifted from artisanal to industrial exploitation in this region, leading to the intrusion. The French arrival escalated the conflict from artisanal livelihood to industrial exploitation. Brazilian authorities viewed the organized fleet's mass capture techniques not as competition, but as theft of a sovereign resource, changing the scale of operations dramatically. The geometry of jurisdiction highlights the disputed zone over the continental shelf. Brazil claimed jurisdiction over resources on and beneath the shelf. France maintained that waters beyond territorial limits, specifically 12 nautical miles, were high seas, or mare liberum, where fishing was free for all. Brazil's argument was that lobsters are benthic organisms, living in constant contact with the seabed. Therefore, they are effectively part of the continental shelf's sedentary resources, belonging exclusively to Brazil. To fish them was to violate Brazilian soil. France argued for the freedom of the seas. Their premise was that lobsters are capable of movement and not fixed, like coral. Thus, they concluded, they are biologically, quote, fish, and since they swim in the water column, they belong to the high seas until caught. The conflict became a clash of wills between leaders. Brazilian President João Goulart defended national sovereignty to protect the shelf's resources. French President Charles de Gaulle defended enterprise and adopted a firm posture to protect the French fleet's rights. By 1963, the dispute escalated into gunboat diplomacy. Brazil dispatched Navy vessels to patrol and physically impede the French trawlers. France responded by sending a destroyer to escort their fishing fleet, putting both naval forces on alert in the open ocean. The standoff in the South Atlantic involved Brazilian and French warships engaging in mutual surveillance for several weeks. The rights to a crustacean dictated the maneuvers of destroyers. The real risk was that a miscalculation could have turned a diplomatic row into a shooting war between allies. The international press covered the event with perplexity and fascination. The idea of a modern naval war over seafood seemed satirical, yet the presence of warships made the threat concrete. In Brazil, the crisis fueled nationalist sentiment. Ultimately, diplomacy triumphed. The Itamaraty, the Brazilian foreign ministry, led intense negotiations to find an quote, ramp. The resolution avoided armed conflict, with negotiations leading to the eventual withdrawal of French vessels from the contested zone. No shots were fired. The geopolitical outcome was a practical victory for Brazil. Although the scientific debate was never formally resolved, the French fleet left the shelf. Brazil established and solidified its consolidated jurisdiction over the region. The Lobster War was not just an anecdote, but a precedent that helped shape the law of the sea. The conflict strengthened the international legal concept that a nation's sovereignty extends to the resources of its continental shelf, anticipating the principles that structure marine resource exploitation today. The Lobster War demonstrates that nothing is too small to define power. Even a humble crustacean can become a symbol of sovereignty, science, and naval might in the arena of international relations and geopolitics.